This video discusses Adox CMS 22 film and looks at how to use it, the film's characteristics, technical details, and sample images. A quick note, CMS 22 does not mean 22 ISO. It means the second version of Adox CMS 20. CMS 22 is a slow film that can be pulled into the ultra-slow territory to control contrast, reduce grain, and improve image detail. I consider slow films to be those that are rated from 12 ISO to 80 ISO and ultra-slow to be anything less than 12. CMS 22 is available in 35mm both individually spooled and in 100-foot bulk rolls, as well as 4x5. Now as a note, Adox is a great company, and if you call or email and need basically any other sheet film size, I am told they will do it and do it quickly. As well, formerly, CMS 22 was available in 120, and that was until Adox's 120 machine broke. And on a personal note, I was really bummed when that happened. I would have liked to have seen what CMS 22 can do in 120 with Adotech IV developer. All of the medium format shots in this video were developed with other developers. For grain, there's none. Well, there's none if the film's developed properly. With a well-developed film, it's hard to find grain on this film, even with a grain focuser. It's not impossible, but it's hard. Adox's datasheet notes CMS 22 is the highest resolving material on Earth, or the highest resolving known material on Earth. It is so sharp that the actual grain size can't be measured by optical devices because they are smaller than optical measuring devices can resolve. Tonality and tonal range are completely dependent on the developer temperature, and amazingly, your ambient room temperature. Yeah, this film is very sensitive to developing conditions. So more so than any film I've used, it's a well-developed negative is dependent on your skill in developing. Using a warm developer will increase your image contrast. Developing in a very warm room, say warmer than typical ambient room temperature, especially if you're using metal developing tanks which conduct temperature more easily, can affect your developer's temperature enough to alter your image results. Generally not positively, warmer developer will increase contrast and also development action, which means you'll overdevelop your negatives. So when you develop, just try to be in a comfortably cool room around 20 degrees Celsius, which is 72 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you have an indoor bathroom with no windows or no outside shared wall, that can be pretty temperature stable year round. For acutance, it's very high. Now, this is a characteristic of high contrast films having high acutance. Given that CMS 22 was originally designed to reproduce two-tone text for use on microfilm storage, and that's a use which requires exceptionally high acutance, it shouldn't surprise in any way that this has very quick changes from dark to light tones. For contrast, this is also totally developer and rated ISO dependent. If you use a standard developer, which would be anything like HC110, Rodinal, or D76, this film will yield very high contrast. If you use Adotech IV, you can really rein that contrast in. If you pull the film to 12 ISO or slower, this is with Adotech IV, contrast can be further reduced for very pleasing reproductions of landscapes and people. So basically what's happening when you use Adotech IV versus other developers is Adotech is specially formulated to flatten the spectral sensitivity curve, which we'll see in a moment what that looks like, and also to reduce the contrast. For sharpness, Adox rates this at 800 line pairs per millimeter. There is, according to a Kodak engineer I talked with on this exact subject for a previous video, some flexibility in interpretation of line pair readings and figure development. I honestly don't understand how, but for the sake of this video, let's assume the 800 line pair per millimeter rating is accurate. So what does that mean? Film resolution when tested in line pairs looks at the contrast difference between adjacent lines and how many of those adjacent lines can be identified within a given millimeter. This is a bit of false equivalency, but that's akin to saying 800 line pairs is like having 1600 rows of pixels jammed into a millimeter. I'll save you the math. That's the equivalent of having a 2241 megapixel full-frame camera sensor. Pause the video here for a second and go grab the best, the sharpest lens that you own. You're back? Great. See that lens? It is not even 10% as sharp as this film's resolving power. The best photographic lenses ever made resolved at 240 line pairs per millimeter, and those were for disc cameras, which has never made any sense to me at all because disc cameras used cruddy low-res film. The best 35mm film camera lenses ever made come in at around 175 to 200 line pairs per millimeter. This film is so much more capable of resolving than your lenses are that any softness you see in your images on this film are not because of the film. For dynamic range, which is also called gamma, Adox doesn't provide a data point on this, but to my eyes, this film should have a very steep gamma line. And that stands to reason because a microfilm film would be read with light projected from behind it, rather like a slide, and a steep gamma line is important for a good slide. Also, Adox notes in the datasheet that this film can be reversal processed for use as slides. In terms of good uses, there is really nothing that this film does badly except sports, action, and astrophotography. If you need a fast shutter speed, or you're shooting in low light, this is not your film. But it is superb for portraits. It's top of the class for landscapes, seascapes, cityscapes, and architecture, and it is fantastic for photos that need significant enlargement. For digital conversion, going back to resolution, this film out-resolves your DSLR by laughable margins. The only challenge with conversion is that it can be hard to find the grain in this film if you DSLR digitize and use live view magnification for grain focusing. That said, I do recommend the approach of DSLR digitization for this film because raw files of your negatives allow for a significant degree of shadow and highlight recovery that scanner scans can't come close to. That benefits this film's editing process greatly because it does not have the strongest shadow retention, so giving yourself any added advantage you can in post will help you get the most out of this film. The spectral sensitivity curve is used to describe the film's relative sensitivity on the y-axis to visible light colors, which are on the x-axis. This film's spectral sensitivity ranges greatly with the developer type, developer concentration, developer chemistry, and ambient room temperature, as well as the rated film speed at capture. That means that this film has a fantastic array of creative possibilities depending on capture and development technique. That said, many of those combinations don't work well. So yes, it's expensive, but stick with Adotech developer. The spectral sensitivity curve in this video is based on Adox's, it's a copy of Adox's datasheet, and it is based on their results with Adotech IV. And I believe that this curve is very similar whether you're shooting at 12 or 20 ISO. I know that the curves in this graph look super dramatic, but the scale on the left is less than with many other films that we've seen in this series. So with good development, CMS 22 will be a flatter film with a good contrast profile, even in daylight, full daylight outside. Now that is, I know, completely contradictory to say that it's flat with a good contrast profile. But it is the case because everything from violet to orange shows exceptional halftones. So this film's spectral sensitivity curve is kind of flattish when developed correctly, but because it has so much data in the actual negative due to the way the film is made, you can still recover all kinds of data if you are scanning and digitizing properly, or if you have good darkroom printing practices. Adox provides the reciprocity data as times, and I've remade it as this table for your reference. An interesting thing to note here is that at shutter speeds of 1/1000th and faster, an added half stop of light is needed. I suspect that if you go to around a 4,000th of a second and faster, that probably a full stop of added light is needed. However, that's going to be like f1.2 and a photo of the sun. You're not getting this film to an exposure that's a 4,000th of a second. So realistically, it would be very hard to get this film to a 1,000th of a second for your exposure. Slow speed reciprocity correction is really great. Given that only a half stop is needed from a second to 10 seconds, and then after that, one stop is needed, that's really fantastic performance, especially for a slow film. And as you can see in this video's sample images, I did make a lot of use of that reciprocity correction data. Adox provides a wide array of usable film sensitivities with Adotech IV, from 3 to 25 ISO. They also indicate that halftone development can provide 14 stops of sensitivity. That's again with Adotech IV in that range. That is as good as T-Max 100 for comparison, and it is also better than very, very many films. So for a film that has a reputation for being very high contrast, to be able to pull halftones out of 14 stops of sensitivity really kind of argues against some of this film's pop culture reputation. My experience also backs up Adox's assertion about the halftones and the sensitivity. And I want to give credit to the Adox team here because they made such a fantastic film, and it is really backed up by a really great developer. Yes, it's not cheap, but holy cow. Used well, the results that this film delivers are simply fantastic. I shot CMS 22 at 12 ISO a lot, and I found that to be my preferred rating. I would definitely try this as a 3 or 6 ISO film using Adox's recommended developer times as well. CMS 22, like any slow film, though even more so here, does not push well at all. I tried it up to 100 ISO, and beyond 20 my results were not worth having. For my preferred format, I liked it a lot in 120. That would have been my preferred format for almost all of this video, quite honestly. And when the Adox 120 machine broke, it was kind of devastating to me because I knew that I might never, and I ended up never again getting to shoot this film in medium format. That said, both 35mm and 4x5 are incredible formats when shooting CMS 22. I truly enjoy the results from 4x5, and I found this to be one of the most enjoyable sheet films that I've used in that format. I developed CMS 22 in 10 different ISO developer concentration combinations. Far less than usual for me in these videos, but after trying Adotech IV, I didn't go back to another chemistry until my last few rolls of this stock when I had run out of Adotech. I used Adotech IV plus 14 and plus 75 using a stand technique in the latter case. D76 plus 3, Ilfosol 3 at 1 plus 14 and plus 60, the latter again being a stand technique. HC110 at plus 31 and plus 250, those are dilutions B and M. And Rodinol at 1 plus 100, again with a stand technique. As a quick note for Adotech IV, when you dilute it into working solution, you need to use distilled water. Any minerals or chemicals in your water, even those trace amounts from filtered or reverse osmosis treated water, can affect the developer's performance. If you've come this far on film and developer cost anyway, the extra $1 for a gallon of distilled water is definitely worth it to help you ensure you have the best image quality. By far and away, my favorite combination is Adotech IV at either 12 or 20 ISO, and that's at 1 plus 14. But I personally preferred 12 ISO. D76 plus 3 at 20 ISO also worked well, but had a distinctly and almost harsh look about it. And in a turn that will shock everyone who's seen enough of the videos in this series, I also like this film in Ilfosol 3, but only as a stand chemistry at a 1 plus 60 concentration and 75 minutes stand developing time. Now that said, Adotech IV is very expensive. To that end, this video has a lot of samples of this film developed in Adotech as a stand developer at a 1 plus 75 concentration. If you are balking at the Adotech cost, which I did every time I bought it, Try the stand development approach that I tested and developed. It will cut your development costs substantially with Adotech. I'll quickly run you through the math as of this video's go-live date. Adotech IV comes in 100 ml bottles. At a concentration of 1+14, it yields 1500 ml of working developer, which is enough for 6 rolls of 35mm film or 10 sheets of 4x5. In the US, Adotech IV costs $20 per 100 ml. That means $3.33 per roll of 35mm film or $2 per sheet of 4x5. And that's at the 1+14 concentration. That's very expensive. D76 plus 3, as a comparison, produces 8 gallons of working chemistry for the same cost. 8 gallons is slightly more than 30 liters. As an added note, once used, the working solution from Adotech cannot be reused. Used as a 1+75 stand developer, 100 ml of Adotech IV turns into 7.6 liters of developer chemistry, which is enough for 30 rolls of 35mm or for 76 sheets of 4x5. That reduces the developer cost to about 66 cents per 35mm roll or 26 cents per 4x5 sheet. That's much more palatable. Now that said, you have the typical drawbacks of stand developing, and Adotech is not entirely consistent in stand developer performance. So try this at your own risk. It is not recommended or suggested anywhere by Adotech. It is developed by my own experimentation. Before you use this in bulk, you should definitely experiment with stand developing Adotech using a small batch of film. Also, Adox's datasheet notes that at the 1+14 developer working solution concentration, Adotech IV can be stored, if there is no air in the bottles, for up to 14 days on a shelf before use, longer if the solution is kept in the fridge. Ooh boy, were there some developers to avoid. And this jives with Adox's technical datasheet, which promises that other developers will not work well. Rodinol 1+100 was the worst developer I tried. The results precluded me from ever trying another Rodinol combination with CMS 22 because it was so bad. Rodinol as a stand developer yielded 0 shadow detail with very muddy highlights. It also managed to add grain to this film, which I know is the stuff's job, but CMS 22 isn't supposed to show grain. After Rodinol, HC110 at dilution B, which is 1+31, created muddy and lackluster negatives. Full disclosure, I used Legacy Pro L110, but it's the same as HC110 to the best of my knowledge. And as a quick aside, dilution M, which is 1+250, did yield good negatives, so I think there is probably some room to find a good HC110 dilution and exposure speed combination that will work better than other non-Adotech chemistry anyway. Coming in at third worst, Ilfosol 3 at 1+14 provided muddy skies, poor shadow detail, and just generally meh looking negatives. Adox CMS 22 is not your first film. This is a film that you arrive at when you have the skill, the technique, and the creative vision needed to make the most of this absolutely fantastic stock. This film, even for film masters, requires learning, practice, and patience. This film requires a dedication first to the practice of film so that you as a photographer can understand what this film offers and how it works. After that, this film requires that you learn how it works specifically, and that will take time. Adox CMS 22 is a destination, a goal, a place you work to get to in order to earn the right to arrive. It is a 3 Michelin star restaurant, a remote mountain summit that sees only 10 people a year, and the view through a plexiglass porthole at the ocean's bottom. More than that, Adox CMS 22 is the journey needed to get to those places. Chefs work for years to master their craft just to get Michelin to talk to them. Mountaineers train for decades to be able to think about attempting a remote peak. Scientists and engineers develop and practice and revise to build deep-sea submersibles. Adox CMS 22, it is that for film photographers. So here's the best advice I can give you for this film. work up to it. Get to know how film works, and when you feel like you have it, pick up a half dozen rolls and some Adotech IV. Develop it yourself. Used well with good camera technique, good developing practices, and good digitization, this film will leave your mind spinning, your heart aflutter, and your mouth cotton ball dry with awe. Thank you for watching this video. Please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track producing content which is useful and helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about checking these every couple of days and answering questions. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future videos, and if I have the technical know-how and equipment, I'm more than happy to make those. One last thing. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I gotta get up, Steinbeck. I have to turn off the camera.